Part 15. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, Mo. Chapter 141. A 5-member awakened team was also fighting zombies near the red zone in Lannan City. In order to prevent the zombies from different blocks from merging into a surging zombie tide, the UHA base adopted a method of breaking up the whole into parts, dividing the awakened teams participating in the trial into different areas, and clearing out these ordinary zombies separately. The closer to the red taboo area, the higher the level of zombie monsters in it is than the danger faced by other teams. But this team is obviously not the opponent of these zombies with higher strength. Even if the 5 people are skilled in cooperation after professional training, it is still a bit stretched to deal with these numerous terrifying zombies for a while. In a building next to the street, Chunan, wearing a colorful suit, was looking at several students below with a nervous face, and even a trace of cold sweat was soaked on his forehead. He did not forget the bet with Mu Chiu, and he had no doubt about the ruthless character of the Yuhei Bing Jun. Mu Chiu really dared to kill people in public. Mu Chiu is now an S-level awakener, and his status in the base has also risen. There may not be any serious consequences after killing Chunan, but his life will be really gone. Because of this, he has been training several students under his command day and night for 2 months. Before the trial, he specially chose this area with many zombies, and even took out his treasured crystal core to improve the students' strength, just to defeat Mu Chiu's 3 students in the trial. But now he obviously overestimated the strength of his students and underestimated the terrifying strength of the zombies on the edge of the red zone. Several students only lasted less than half a day before they were stretched to the limit and fell into the dilemma of being surrounded by a group of zombies. This bunch of trash. Chunan gritted his teeth, his face flushed because of being too excited, raised a communicator on his waist, and cursed. Hurry up and use the things I gave you before. After hearing Chunan's instructions, the faces of several students surrounded by the zombies showed obvious hesitation. But the 2 students in the lead still took out 2 needles containing unknown red liquid and injected them directly into their necks. The needles with strange liquid flowing were injected into their bodies along the blood vessels. The next second after the needle was injected, the chests of the 2 students began to rise and fall violently, followed by some kind of low gasping sound. The veins in their necks bulged, and their eyes bulged, as if they had experienced some great pain. The 2 students howled, and the sound from their throats was extremely hoarse. The next moment, the bodies of the 2 students who looked only in their teens suddenly grew several times larger, the deltoid muscles on their shoulders bulged high, and even their faces became extremely hideous. The surrounding zombies were instantly torn apart by the 2 students with red eyes with great force, and then the 2 students with red eyes ran towards the zombies in front like wild beasts. Chunan, who was standing in a high-rise building watching all this, also showed a hideous smile on his face. The students were injected with the special strengthening injections he brought from the exchange office, which can greatly improve the physical fitness and supernatural powers of the injector in a short period of time, but the corresponding price is to consume the user's life. Looking at the students rushing into the zombies below and hunting zombies like harvesting straw, Chunan finally felt relieved. I won after all, Mu Chiu. Chunan believed that with the blessing of the drug, the 5 students joined forces, even the A-level heretics would not be their opponents. But in the next moment, Chunan's face froze and he could no longer laugh. What is that? I saw a group of hideous monsters suddenly appearing on the horizon in the distance, with bloodthirsty eyes wide open, rushing out of the red zone with monstrous supernatural energy. There were deformed mutant zombies, huge bloodthirsty animals with sharp claws, and weird mutant insects. The surging superpowers rushed towards Chunan and his group, roaring to the sky. What was even more terrifying was that these astonishing numbers of mutant monsters all exuded terrifying superpowers. Each monster was above B level, and even faintly exuded an aura that exceeded A level. Several students who were still hunting zombies had no time to dodge and escape. They were attacked and killed by several mutant cats and dogs in an instant, and their stomachs were ripped open. Before they died, their eyes were filled with horror and panic. Even the law enforcement team member who was flying in the air with a camera and broadcasting the whole process had his throat cut by a sharp-toothed bird and died instantly. The houses around were destroyed by these huge monsters, rubble flew, dust flew everywhere. In the fog, the only thing that could be seen was a pair of bloodthirsty and violent eyes, and the terrifying roar and the sound of the house collapsing came from his ears. Chunan had no time to feel sad for the death of his students, because the next second, the astonishing number of zombie monsters were rushing towards him. As the house collapsed, Chunan's violent screams resounded throughout the block. "What on earth is that?" Mu-Chiu stood on the balcony of the resort hotel, frowning slightly. He also felt that a group of corpses with good energy were rioting in the distance. But what made him feel strange was that a strange wave in his mind also came from the group of corpses, and even the fire demon in his body moved. It was as if something was calling him from afar. Familiar, yet strange. Mu-Chiu didn't like unknown existences, especially existences that he couldn't figure out. At this moment, the communicator on his waist vibrated. Mu-Chiu turned on the communicator, and what came from it was Wei Ying's message. "All awakened people in Lannan City obey the order and immediately organize a team to head to the southwest to stop the zombie riot. The law enforcement team led by me has now set off. Please be sure to hold on until the law enforcement team arrives." The communicator in his hand heard the urgent voice of Wei Ying one after another. In order to prevent the monsters from rioting in the red zone, Yu Hai even used these trial teams. At the same time, Ji Yufeng's cold voice came from the communicator again, "I am Ji Yufeng. In 2 hours, I'll be at my destination." The sound stopped suddenly, but all the awakened people in Lannan City heard the calm voice of the white god of death, and immediately the communicator in each awakened person's hand flashed with red dots. This is the positioning device in the communicator activated. However, the communicator in Mu-Chiu's hand came out with a call at this moment, and Xiao Hanyan's voice came from inside. "Mu-Chiu, I know it is difficult for people to accept such a dangerous mission at this time, but now Yuhei Base needs your strength. Please lead the awakened people in Lannan City to resist the zombie tide." "I will." Xiao Hanyan's voice was obviously softer. Xiao Hanyan still valued Mu-Chiu, a twin with great potential. Needless to say, Mu-Chiu heard Xiao Hanyan's soft voice in her ears, but suddenly interrupted, and then narrowed her eyes and looked into the distance. "I happen to have some things to go over there to confirm. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord." Author, Mo-Xian-Yu. Chapter 142. In a remote suburb far from the city, a skinny and shrunken figure slowly stood in front of a mutant black bear that exuded a strong aura. If you look closely, you will find that this skinny man is wearing a black robe, with a emaciated appearance, and the exposed skin is just skin and bones. The dry flesh is tightly attached to the bones, and the face is even more sunken. The cheekbones are shrunk, and it looks like a standing skeleton from a distance. In front of the skeleton man, there is a mutant black bear with a body as huge as a giant tree. The huge shadow hangs down, the aura is strong, and the pair of meat claws are extremely thick. It is not surprising that even a truck will be destroyed and scrapped with this palm. This giant bear is a mutant animal at the peak of a level M. Roar. One of the black bear's eyes has been scrapped, and it is soaked with blood. It opened its arms and roared, and then waved its huge palm to attack the skeleton man in front of it. Hee. The skeleton man's face showed no expression, only his teeth were open and closed, making a creepy laugh. The next second, the skeleton man's arm joints were bent, and the skin flew off, turning into a shining bone blade, piercing into the thick palm of the black bear. At the same time, a series of white bone spurs suddenly appeared under the giant bear's feet, piercing into the soles of its feet, and blood spurted. The black bear screamed with severe pain in the palm and under the feet at the same time, and the ground was unstable and it was about to fall to the ground. But the next moment, several sharp bone spurs protruded from the ground around it, piercing the huge body of the black bear, and it was dead in an instant. The skeleton man flashed, and his arm turned into a bone sword. White light flashed, blood splattered, and the black bear's head had been cut off at the root, and a beating heart was held in the dry hand. The hot blood splashed on the corner of the skeleton man's mouth, and he stretched out his body to lick it. The skeleton man laughed creepily again, but turned to look at a big tree. "Son, why are you looking for me at this time?" A short dwarf figure suddenly appeared beside the big tree, looking old, and walked to the skeleton man and said, "Bone Dragon, the boss asked us to deal with Much Yu has been located, and now it's time to deal with the famous Yu Hai Bing Jun." Bing Jun. The Bone Dragon snorted lightly, and the disdain in his eyes was beyond words. He said in a hoarse voice, "Shadow, that waste can't even deal with a newly promoted S-level kid. Boss Peng doesn't trust me so much that he wants to call you along. Haha, there are unexpected events, and it's always better to solve it early." The short dwarf old man smiled but didn't talk too much with the Bone Dragon. The Bone Dragon crushed the fresh heart in his hand, twisted his neck, and instantly heard a series of crackling sounds of broken bones. At this moment, the communicator on the Bone Dragon's waist also received the assembly order from Wei Ying and Ji Yufeng. The dwarf old man laughed and said, "It seems that we don't need to go to find this Ice King. We have to act quickly, otherwise it will be difficult to deal with when the White Death arrives." The dwarf old man waved his arms, and the figures of the two people actually flashed a ripple in the space. The next moment, the thin figure of the Bone Dragon and the dwarf old man disappeared. The roar of the zombie monsters echoed from the horizon, emitting a powerful energy that captured people's hearts. Dozens of broken bodies of awakened people were lying on the ground, and the fierce smell of blood filled the entire block. And opposite these terrifying monsters, there stood hundreds of human awakened people. Most of them were young and newly awakened. Their eyes were filled with horror, and they looked at the surging corpses in front of them with horror. They could not imagine that what should have been a simple awaken test would have turned into a decisive battle with these terrifying monsters. "I'm going to die, I'm going to die." In the crowd, the fat man's face was pale and his heart was pounding. If it weren't for the fact that the communicator on his body could also be used for positioning, he would have wanted to run back to the base immediately. Why don't we evacuate and avoid the limelight first, and wait for the law enforcement team to come and then go up when everyone is gathered? They had already had a brief battle with these corpses before, and the result was of course a capital failure. They, the awakened, were far inferior to them in terms of both number and strength. It's too late. At this rate, these monsters will rush out of Lannan City before the law enforcement team arrives. Beside the fat man, Ji Yu also had a flash of panic in his eyes, but he still balanced his heaving chest and forced himself to calm down. The pupils under Ji Yu's glasses suddenly turned into a deep purple-blue color, and a strange silver-white light flashed. Then, during the pause, she looked at the fierce zombies on the opposite side that were ready to attack. This is her unique ability, Silver Pupils, which can see through the battle situation and the enemy's weaknesses to a certain extent. In the dark and terrifying zombie tide, each zombie heretic has a powerful and terrifying ability in his body. If placed in the yellow zone, each one is no less than the boss level. And there are thousands of such terrifying monsters in front of them. Strange. Ji Yu seemed to have discovered something. Her pupils widened, her eyes were solemn, and sweat beads flowed down her forehead. "What's wrong?" The awakener next to her noticed Ji Yu's abnormality and asked quickly. Ji Yu did not answer, but just stared into the distance. In her sight, the energy in the bodies of those terrifying zombie monsters was extremely surging, but different from the monsters of normal levels. Their red eyes were also unprecedentedly violent and bloody, and their unstoppable momentum seemed to tear apart all the creatures in front of them. Above the heads of these monsters, there was an illusory red thread connected. And these red spiritual threads finally gathered on a huge ladybug monster in the deepest part of the corpse tide. The ladybug monster exuded a dangerous aura far higher than these zombie heretics, and the terrifying spiritual power even made Gu tremble. Is this S-level? Gu took a deep breath and said to her companions. These zombie heretics are controlled. In other words, this corpse tide was premeditated by some existence. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 143. These zombies are actually controlled. Many awakened people looked at each other, and they could see the horror in each other's eyes. What kind of existence can control so many zombie heretics at one time? It's an S-level soul-eating worm. Gu stared, and after a while, he moved his eyes away from the depths of the corpse tide, calmed his mind, and explained to his companions around him. Soul-eating worms are an extremely terrifying species. Their pollen can make some low-level awakened people physically weak and mentally unstable. In severe cases, it can weaken the awakened people's abilities and cause hallucinations. High-level soul-eating worms can even control other creatures to a certain extent through mental power. These zombies like now are controlled by the spiritual threads of soul-eating worms, which will cause such a corpse tide riot. However, this soul-eating worm is too outrageous. Such a huge corpse tide cannot be controlled by an S-level. Is it the monster in the red zone of Lannan City? An awakened person guessed the culprit of this corpse tide riot, and his voice trembled. If the monster really came out in person, let alone the awakened ones, even the White Death would not be their opponent. I am afraid that only the base guardian like Wang Deipen can compete with it. I didn't detect the energy beyond the S level. Gu shook her head, but still looked at the zombies in front of her with worry. Even these astonishing numbers of zombie monsters are far beyond their ability to deal with. All they can do now is to try their best to stop them and hold on until the law enforcement team arrives to wipe out these zombies in one fell swoop. At this point, there is only one way to fight. Roar. Just when everyone looked sad and didn't know how to deal with these monsters, the zombies in front of them roared from nowhere. Along with this roar, the zombies suddenly roared violently, and then countless zombie monsters rioted and rushed towards hundreds of awakened ones frantically. In an instant, a big melee between hundreds of awakened ones and thousands of zombies broke out in this empty block. A wide variety of superpowers with different styles are displayed on the awakened ones. Any of them can be called amazing killing skills before the end of the world. In contrast, the zombies and monsters that are rushing towards them are mainly based on strength and speed. More monsters drag their huge bodies to attack, and they roll up extraordinary momentum when they open and close. Even the earth is cracked by the fierce rush of these monsters. With drastic blows, the shadows of bullets and gunpowder continue to emerge in the group of corpses. In less than a few minutes, the air is filled with a strong smell of blood, and scarlet bloodstains are splattered on the ground and sky. But soon, everyone found that the number of these zombies seemed to be endless, and there was no end to the black tide of corpses. Damn it, the information is wrong. The number of these terrifying zombie monsters like black clouds pressing down on the city is more than thousands. Damn, who told me there were only 1,000 zombies? There are more than thousands. They suddenly discovered that countless zombies were attracted by gunfire and artillery fire at the end of the street on the other side. How small were the hundreds of awakened people in front of this wave of zombies? What's more, most of them were new awakened people who participated in the trial, so how could they be opponents of these middle and high-level zombies? In the air, countless fierce flying mutant beasts attacked the crowd below rapidly. More than a dozen law enforcement teams carrying equipment on their shoulders and responsible for transmitting the images were torn to pieces by the sharp claws of mutant beasts in an instant. The scene of disembowelment was presented in front of tens of thousands of survivors in the base. The scene of zombies besieging the city like hell was terrifying. In the Yuhei base, countless humans looked at the pictures from the distant battlefield and couldn't help but feel nervous. How long will it take for the law enforcement team to arrive? In the meeting room of the base, Xiao Hanyan was also extremely anxious, holding up the intercom in her hand and asking. The voice of Wei Ying came from the intercom, mixed with the roar of zombies and the roar of artillery fire. We encountered the remaining zombies on the way, and it is expected to take some time to reach the target location. Xiao Hanyan looked at the awakened people who were surrounded and attacked by the zombie tide in the picture, and saw that they could not hold on, and his eyes were worried. After all, there are also many emerging awakened people here, and these people are the future of Yuhei base in the future. Hanyan, why are you so anxious? It's just a few hundred awakened people. The base doesn't need these few hundred people. Wang Deipen, half lying on the chair, looking at the front line scenes on the screen, yawning boredly. In his opinion, the death of a few awakened people is not a common thing. Even if all these hundreds of awakened people died, it would not hurt the entire Yuhei, at most losing a few good seedlings. Xiao Hanyan glanced at Wang Deipen with disgust and stopped talking. On the front battlefield, the awakened members of the trial team had been dispersed by the tide of corpses, and countless hungry and bloodthirsty zombie monsters rushed towards the flesh and blood in front of them. Dozens of young awakened members had died tragically in the mouths of zombie monsters, and the remaining more than 100 survivors obviously could not hold on for long. In less than half a quarter of an hour, they would probably die at the hands of these man-eating monsters. In the crowd, Jiyu, who was wearing glasses and tall, was surrounded by everyone. She activated her supernatural power and her eyes were silvery white at this moment, watching the situation in the field intently. Her ability can see through the enemy's weaknesses to the greatest extent. The scene in her eyes keeps changing. Jiyu is trying to use her ability to find a way out for everyone. At this moment, her companion's anxious cry suddenly came to her ear, "Be careful." Jiyu sensed something, turned her head and looked, and then her pupils widened, and a panic flashed in the depths of her eyes. Suddenly, a gray-haired giant wolf leaped several feet in the sky, waving its sharp claws flashing with cold light and rushing towards her. The ability of the pupil technique allows her to clearly see the gray wolf's body expanding in her eyes. The ferocious bloody mouth has opened, and it will swallow her whole in the next second, but her body has no time to react. Jiyu is completely desperate. She can even imagine the horrible scene of her head and body being separated. Suddenly, Jiyu felt a hint of coolness around her, and the gradually deepening chill made her sober. The next moment, a streak of ice blue light pierced through the air and hit the gray wolf that was flying towards it. Without even a scream, the huge gray wolf was frozen into a ball of ice. Starting from the ice, a crystal blue physical staircase that went down appeared out of thin air along the direction of the streak. Perhaps stimulated by the sudden biting cold, the eyes of all the awakened people present were attracted. At the end of the stairs, there was a sound of footsteps, and then a handsome man in a black windbreaker and a white shirt walked down with a smile on his face. Next to the man, there was a delicate girl with pink hair and a white dress. A gentle and playful chuckle spread throughout the audience. Teacher G is not in a good state now. I didn't expect it to be so lively here, how about adding me? At this moment, Mu Qiu was like a god descending from heaven. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, Mo Xianyu. Chapter 144. Just when everyone was in despair, Mu Qiu appeared in front of everyone as a god descending from heaven. His elegant figure, combined with the crystal blue ice mist in the air, gave people a great sense of shock. Mu Qiu. Yes, it's that Ice King. Great, we have hope, All the awakened people present smiled happily. An extra S-level combat power means that they can hold on for a while longer, and maybe they can hold on until the law enforcement team arrives. And in the Yuhei base hundreds of kilometers away, countless survivors couldn't help but show hopeful eyes when they saw this scene. Has Mu Qiu arrived? Xiao Hanyan couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief when she saw Mu Qiu's figure appear on the battlefield. Her swollen chest rose and fell slightly, and there was a ray of hope in her expression. Presumably, with Mu Qiu's S-level combat power, these trial teams can hold on for a while longer. Sitting aside, Wang Deipen and Zhang Qinggui both had inexplicable expressions on their faces when they saw Mu Qiu appear. On the battlefield, everyone was excited when they saw Mu Qiu appear. At the critical moment of life and death, they did not expect Mu Qiu to take them out of the dead. After all, even the destruction class could not say that they could escape from so many corpses, but with one more S-class strongman to share the pressure, they could reduce some danger. Mu Qiu took Yu Qi's delicate jade hand and walked slowly to the ground, and the ice stairs behind him turned into ice crystals and dissipated. In front of him was a corpse tide that could not see the end, but Mu Qiu looked at a certain existence in the depths of the corpse tide. He could feel that there was a pair of eyes staring at him in the dark, and that familiar breath was also in the depths of the corpse tide. He did not like this unknown feeling. Let me see who you are. Any conspiracy will be in vain in the face of absolute power. Mu Qiu, be careful of the heretics in the zombie tide. Ji Yu looked at Mu Qiu's back with a worried look in her eyes. She had sensed that there were many powerful beings in the zombie tide before, and now that Mu Qiu appeared, she couldn't help but worry about him. Thank you for the reminder, Teacher Ji. Mu Qiu slowly turned his head, a smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, leaving Ji Yu with a handsome and sunny profile, and a wide windbreaker gave people a very solid and reliable feeling. At this moment, for some reason, Ji Yu's face rose with a touch of rosy clouds, and a heart that had been silent for a long time suddenly beat. In the respectful eyes of everyone, Mu Qiu faced the zombie tide with 11 qi, and his chic demeanor was deeply rooted in the hearts of the people, and he said loudly, "Crazy party? Let me move around." Dozens of mutant zombies rushed towards Mu Qiu with swift bodies and sharp fangs. The latter stood still, but a circular transparent array pattern appeared in front of him, with an indigo disc star mark on it that rotated rapidly. The next second, countless crystal blue ice shuttles shot out from the circular array, and the speed was even faster than the trajectory of bullets. Swoosh! The sound of ice shuttles breaking through the air rang in everyone's ears, and they watched the zombies being shot by ice shuttles. The tiny ice shuttles hit the bodies, and the bodies of the zombie monsters also stagnated. Then, a bunch of ice flowers broke out from the bodies of these heretics, and the whole body exploded like an ice cone. Dozens of huge mutant wolfhounds pounced on Mu Qiu, and the breath they exuded was actually A-level energy. Mu Qiu's hand flashed with ice blue mist, and then it condensed into the shape of a long sword. Still standing in the same place, Mu Qiu raised his arm and swung it, a blue slash cut through the sky, accompanied by a row of neat blood lines, and the bodies of the dozen wolfhounds were cut in half. Carrying the long ice knife on his shoulder, the next moment, there was another strong wind in his ears. I saw a huge giant eagle falling from the sky, gliding in the air at an agile speed, with its bright claws and beak flashing with black light rushing straight towards Mu Qiu's vital points. Mu Qiu didn't even look at it, and just raised his hand and happened to grab the giant eagle's beak tightly. No matter how the latter struggled, it was useless. The huge bite force of the bird's beak seemed so weak in front of the man. A chill radiated from the palm of his hand, and at the junction of the palm and the giant eagle's beak, a line of ice quickly spread out. In less than a blink of an eye, the giant eagle was frozen into a piece of ice corpse. Mu Qiu let go, and heard the sound of ice breaking. The giant eagle was frozen into a corpse. Mu Qiu, wearing black clothes, held a long knife in his hand, looked at the more turbulent zombies in front of him, and smiled, Do you want to dance too? The zombies around him naturally didn't understand what he said. They were irrational and just wanted to tear up all the living things in front of them. They rushed towards Miu and the others fearlessly. Yuchi stood quietly beside Miu, with no fear on his face. Instead, he looked at these ferocious zombies with curiosity. Ice field. The long knife in Miu's hand seemed to have turned into a sickle of the god of death to harvest life. The zombie monsters were often slowed down and frozen by an inexplicable cold air before they got 6 feet close to him. Only a few high-level zombies could slightly support the ice field. When they came to Miu, they only flashed a blue light, and their bodies were already separated from their heads. Is this the power of the Ice King? As expected of a powerful elemental system. Great, awesome. The awakened ones around him all looked towards the center of the zombie tide. Countless zombies attacked Miu one after another, but the latter stood straight in place, his slender figure like an undefeated god of war. In front of him, countless zombies were frozen into ice cubes, and their hideous faces before death were still clearly visible through the ice. At this moment, Miu, who was standing in the center of the zombie tide, slowly threw down his long knife, and a burst of cold air mixed with powerful supernatural power fluctuations vibrated in all directions. A pair of lifelike ice wings suddenly grew behind Miu, and as the wings trembled, Miu's figure floated slightly in the air. Heaven and earth. The man's face returned to a calm and indifferent expression, he raised his arm slightly, and the tone of his mouth was like a god exiled from the world. I am the only one. Seeing this scene, everyone's eyes widened, and it was difficult to remain calm, and some people even couldn't close their jaws in surprise. I saw that a huge ice pillar as big as a tall building condensed in the sky, with an eternal cold breath hanging in the air above the heads of the corpses. 3,000 colds. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, Mo. Chapter 145. Is this the top elemental awakener? Bing, Bing Jun Niubi. In the Yuhei base hundreds of kilometers away, countless ordinary survivors also used the huge curtains on the street walls. When he saw Miu's tyrannical strength, his face turned red with excitement. Most of them live deep under the protection of the safe zone, and their memories of these zombies still remain in the horrific scenes at the beginning of the apocalypse. Now that I see an awakened person who can fight thousands of zombies with one person, a ray of hope shines in my heart. Similarly, there were many awakened people in the crowd who saw the scene with incredulous expressions on their faces. With existences like these among the corpses, just one of them would have to fight in a stalemate for a long time. But Miu was able to kill hundreds of people effortlessly, and Bing Lord's powerful reputation once again refreshed their understanding. Only Wei Linger stood at the front of the crowd, looking at the man in black robe with a calm face in the picture. Worry flashed across her pretty face. Miu, be careful. Under the siege of thousands of zombie monsters, not to mention the S-class awakeners, even the destruction-class guardians in the base dare not say that they can escape unscathed. At the same time, in a dark alley in the yellow district of Lannan City. The deep and long alley was filled with the strong smell of blood, and there were even traces of fresh blood spattered on the walls. A huge mutant squirrel that looked like a giant bear was squatting in a dark corner, making crisp chewing sounds from its mouth. I saw that the squirrel's brown hair was already stained with bright red blood, and there was a broken and mutilated corpse at its feet, while its front paws were grabbing a headless corpse and munching crazily. Elsewhere at the entrance of the alley, Shueqinya's figure slowly emerged from the gray mist, with a bright long knife in her hand still flowing with blood. Behind him, there were also several corpses of awakened people with their throats cut. These awakened ones are similar in age to Shueqinya and the other three, and they all have a fatal blood mark on their necks. The look of panic before death still remained on his cold face. Weird, monsters, you are all monsters. A weak cry came along with violent breathing. The strong man who was the teacher of the trial team leaned against the wall of the deep alley. The burly man had long lost his initial pride at this moment. The charred black color of the flames could be seen on his body, and his face was full of fear. And standing directly in front of the burly man was Mu Chiu's student Lin Feng. Lin Feng's chest heaved violently, the intense flames coming out of his body kept rising up and down, and the red color in his eyes flashed frequently. After a moment, the flames in Lin Feng's pair of metallic gauntlets flipped over, absorbing all the violent flames emerging from Lin Feng's body. As the flames on his body were extinguished, Lin Feng's consciousness gradually returned to clarity, and he looked at the strong man leaning against the wall with a look of luck. This strong man's superpower level is really not weak, he is only one step away from reaching the A-level level. Even though the three of them worked together, they couldn't defeat it after a long time. In the end, Lin Feng forcibly activated the energy hidden in his body, and almost went berserk again. Caressing the X-glove in his hand, it was precisely because it absorbed all the violent flame energy that Lin Feng was able to regain his sanity. A cold light flashed, and Shueqinya's cold figure appeared in front of the man. Without saying any more nonsense, a large amount of blood splattered behind the strong man, and his powerful body collapsed. Then, what is that? Su Wen's voice came with a trembling voice. Lin Feng and the two looked up in the direction of the voice, with shock in their eyes. I saw a huge icicle forming in the sky not far away, hanging high in the air. The cold chill could be felt even from afar, and at the same time, a powerful burst of strange energy came from the direction of the icicles, vaguely accompanied by the roar of zombie monsters. Its teacher. The three of them looked at each other. How could they not see that this was their teacher's handiwork? Let's go. The figures of Lin Feng and the others quickly disappeared from the alley, with the wind whistling past their ears, and they rushed in the direction of Optimus Icicle. They have to rush over to help Mu Chiu. But the hundreds of awakened people at the scene saw a scene they would never forget. Countless zombie heretics intended to attack in Mu Chiu's direction. But ice shuttles like crystal blocks appeared around Mu Chiu, shooting in all directions like bullets. Blood was everywhere, and hundreds of zombies were penetrated directly by the dense ice shuttles and fell to the ground one after another. Heaven and earth. As Mu Chiu's indifferent words came out, the black robe behind him rose up, and the raised wrist suddenly dropped. I am the only one. With the movement of his wrist, the huge icicle hanging in the sky seemed to be pushed by invisible hands, falling at an extremely fast speed like lightning and flint. The boundless cold air descended along with the shadows that covered the sky. As the huge icicle fell downwards, its shape changed into a sharp ice spear. The ice spear holding up the sky penetrates the ground with the eternal cold breath, like the judgment sent down by the gods on the world, with majestic momentum. The sound of violent explosions was accompanied by the scene of ice exploding before the world. The spear smashed into the ground, rolling up a large wave of cold wind and waves. All the zombie monsters around were hit by the cold waves and turned into ice blocks. Countless bodies that were frozen into ice blocks were blasted by the powerful momentum of the ice giant spear. The bodies instantly shattered into powdered ice crystals and dissipated in the wind. The originally broken streets turned into an ice field just like this. Gurgle. Among the onlookers, someone rolled his throat and swallowed his saliva first, followed by a series of exhalations. Everyone looked at each other in surprise. After their tense nerves relaxed slightly, they all saw the shock in each other's eyes. With just this one blow, thousands of high-level zombies died, and the surrounding ground was frozen into an ice plain. The means of Yu Hai Bingjun were so terrifying. In an area more than 10 kilometers away from many awakened people, a law enforcement team of more than 1,000 people was fighting fiercely with the zombies. The zombie swarm of thousands of zombies was no match for the members of the law enforcement team. They were all wiped out by the awakened ones in just a few minutes. In the crowd, Wei Ying picked up the flashing communicator on his waist and asked anxiously, "What's the situation at the front line?" The zombies blocking the road took up too much time, so they couldn't get to the zombie tide in the first place. Let those trial teams hold on, we will get there soon. Wei Ying's voice became a little hurried. The awakened ones of those trial teams were also the future of the base. He didn't want those seeds of hope to fall in the zombie tide. But the slightly trembling voice of the intelligence officer came from the other side of the communicator. No, it's Bing Jun. Has Mu Qiu arrived? Then let him take those awakened people away from there. The number of zombies this time is far beyond expectations. No. The person on the other side of the communicator swallowed hard and tried his best to organize his words, but he couldn't hide the tremor in his words. Bing Jun, he blocked the entire zombie tide alone. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, Mo Xianyu. Chapter 146. What? Wei Ying's pupils widened, and his expression was so shocked that his voice became louder. He never expected that Mu Qiu alone could stop the zombie riot composed of thousands of high-level heretics. Beside Wei Ying, Ji Yufeng, who was wearing a white suit, also stopped. Ji Yufeng's indifferent face showed a moving expression, and he looked up in the direction of the zombie tide in the distance. Even though they were more than 10 kilometers apart, he could feel the majestic corpse Ji emanating from the zombie riot. Mu Qiu. A light curtain flashed under Ji Yufeng's black-framed glasses, and he lowered his head slightly, wondering what he was thinking. In the meeting room of Yuhei Building, the senior executives led by Zhang Qinggui and Wang Deipen could not sit still when they saw the scene of the frozen 1,000 miles. The shock in their eyes was beyond words. I didn't expect that Brother Mu was so gifted. He was so strong just after he was promoted to S level. After a while, Zhang Qinggui came back to his senses and said meaningfully. And Wang Deipen sat straight, and when he looked at Mu Qiu in the picture, his eyes were more serious than ever. Wang Deipen knew that as an awakened person of the elemental system, he could not reach the means shown by Mu Qiu when he was at S level. This kid. Maybe he really has the potential to compete with me. On the battlefield, countless zombie monsters swooping up were frozen into ice cubes by the scattered polar cold. Hundreds of awakened people around stood in the distance, but did not dare to move forward at all. The coldness slightly stimulated their bodies. They had no doubt that as long as they got 3 feet closer, even the awakened ones would be frozen into ice corpses by this terrifying cold air that did not distinguish between enemies and friends. The attack just now wiped out thousands of zombies, but this dark tide of zombies seemed to have no end. And a large number of zombie monsters gathered around Mu Qiu at some point, as if they could not be killed, and they attacked Mu Qiu one after another. And the black robe behind Mu Qiu fluttered, and a girl in white stood beside him, who was not frightened by the astonishing number of zombies. The level of the zombies in the back was getting higher and higher. Countless deformed zombies, or powerful or agile zombies, attacked Mu Qiu with scarlet eyes. The latter always had a faint smile on his face, and a ball of ice blue mist spread out in his palm, condensed into a miniature ice spear. WWW. Mu Qiu waved the spear in his hand and fought with the zombies. The spear was floating with gorgeous ice blue mist. Every time it hit the zombie heretics, the bodies of these terrifying monsters were instantly frozen into a ball of ice, and then they were shattered by a huge force. And standing next to Mu Qiu, Yuichi, who was holding a laser pistol from the exchange office in her hand, pulled the trigger with agility. Each beam of laser ray can accurately hit the vital parts of the zombies. Under the shattering of the crystal core, even those fierce high-level zombies are powerless. The hideous body fell to the ground and lost its life. This pink-haired girl's shooting skills are so amazing. Yuichi's performance also stunned the awakened people who were watching. They did not expect that a girl who looked like a vase would have such superb shooting skills. Even the special forces in the base could not compare with this girl in shooting skills. Mewtwo and his partner fought in the zombie tide like harvesting straw. Everywhere they passed was the shattered corpses of zombies and the nearly solidified frost in the air. The bloody smell in the air was instantly solidified by the cold frost of the base. From a distance, it looked like a bloody ice rain. I'm afraid the number of zombies in this tide is tens of thousands. An awakened person looked at the corpse tide in front of him with surprise and said uncertainly. The companions beside him had been stunned by Mewtwo's god of war and could not answer his question. But one thing can be confirmed. If Mewtwo hadn't arrived, they would never have been able to get out alive. A gust of wind suddenly came from behind the crowd. Many awakened people looked back and saw a ball of fire and two figures rushing over. The people who came were three of Mewtwo's students. Linfeng panted and looked at the amazing scene of Mewtwo and Yui killing people in front of him, and his eyes were also shocked. How could our salted fish teacher be so powerful? How could this be the style of a salty fish? Everyone looked at each other in bewilderment. They did not expect that Mewtwo's strength was so fierce that he could block the terrifying zombie tide composed of thousands of zombies. As they continued to kill with the ice power, Mewtwo and Yuichi's figures continued to go deeper into the zombie tide. Countless broken corpses were lying around. And the number of high-level zombies in front was also increasing. A wild giant gorilla slapped his chest fiercely. The hair on his body mutated like steel needles under the effect of the virus. The whole body was covered with a layer of steel needle armor. Any creature close to it was pierced by sharp steel needles. The energy emitted by the wild giant gorilla actually surpassed the A level. A huge giant maggot surged out from the ground, causing the earth to crack. This was also an S-level heretic. The two monsters seemed to be quite afraid of the coldness emanating from Mewtwo. They roared but did not dare to move forward. After a bloody massacre, the roars of the zombies around Mewtwo became less and less. Finally I found you. Mewtwo threw out the ice spear, and in an instant, it was accompanied by a gust of wind, causing the head of an A-level zombie to explode. And standing in front of Mewtwo was a huge red-spotted ladybug with red eyes. Mewtwo stood in front of the ladybug, but frowned slightly. The inexplicable breath was indeed sensed in the ladybug's body, but it was far less strong than at the beginning. It seemed to be true, but it made him feel familiar. What on earth is going on? Just as Mewtwo was wondering, a beam of spiritual light flashed above the red-spotted ladybug's head. A tender voice came to Mewtwo's ears. Brother. Pictures he had never seen before flashed quickly in his mind like a dim film. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 147. Brother. A slightly childish yet somewhat enchanting voice, the lingering sound echoed in Mewtwo's ears. In his mind, several images that Mewtwo had never recalled suddenly flashed across his mind. At sunset, a girl in red stood by the lake, her silky hair hanging down. The girl bowed slightly and stood in front of him. The picture was so blurry that he couldn't even see the girl's face. He could only vaguely see the outline of the girl's red lips. Who is this girl? For some reason, when the girl's figure emerged in his mind, the Fire Lord inside his body also roared crazily in the cage of imprisonment. Fragments of the girl in the red dress kept flashing through her mind, including scenes from the apocalypse, but Mewtwo could never see the girl's face clearly. Do you still remember our agreement? Mewtwo's vision suddenly froze at a certain moment. In the moment when the picture flashed wildly, he seemed to see the girl's face. It felt vaguely familiar, but it became blurry again in an instant. But what impressed Mewtwo most deeply was the girl's deep scarlet eyes. In reality, the moment Mewtwo was stunned, the zombies around him attacked him without any hesitation. The wild giant gorilla beat its chest violently, the muscles on its body were piled up like rocks, and the powerful fluctuations of supernatural powers came out, making people's hearts palpitate. The next second, the brown-black hair on the wild giant gorilla suddenly exploded like hair chestnuts, and the dark hair chestnuts were like steel needles penetrating everything. In an instant, the bodies of dozens of zombies around the mutated gorilla were pierced, and holes as big as bowls appeared on the broken bodies. People were amazed by the terrifying power of the gorilla's hair. Behind Mewtwo, the ground suddenly rose up, followed by cracks on the ground, and spider web-like cracks appeared. A terrifying maggot several feet long suddenly rose from the depths of the earth, causing smoke and dust to fly everywhere. The maggot's densely packed tentacles were covered with disgusting yellow mucus, and large swaths of the rocks on the ground were corroded upon contact. The maggot's oversized size overwhelmed hundreds of mutated zombies as soon as they appeared. Those zombies were corroded by the maggot mucus and instantly became bloody. There were even wisps of white smoke coming out of the broken body, and it was corrupted into bones in the blink of an eye. Roar! But at this moment, a house behind the group of corpses suddenly collapsed, and a huge Tyrannosaurus Rex corpse with white bones rushed out from the collapsed rubble. The dinosaur skeleton, as tall as a building, stood upright. It exuded a burst of terrifying supernatural energy, but seemed to have an independent mind. It opened its big mouth and roared towards Mewtwo. Surrounded by 3S-level terrifying heretics, there are also an astonishing number of mutated zombies emerging like waves. No S-class awakened person would have any chance of survival facing such an extreme lineup. But at this moment, Mewtwo seemed to be stunned, standing there without any reaction, and there was another expressionless and cute girl standing next to her. Mewtwo. The awakened members of the trial team standing outside the zombie wave couldn't help but look desperate when they saw Mewtwo surrounded by many zombies, including several terrifying S-class heretics. Even if Ji Yufeng, the white god of death, were here, he would not have a chance to escape if he was besieged by such a terrifying monster. But with low strength, they could only watch Mewtwo being devoured by countless zombie monsters. The faces of many awakened people showed sadness and anger, not only for the sacrifice of Mewtwo, the Jade Sea Ice Lord, but also for their own powerlessness in this situation. What's going on? In the high-level conference room of Yuhei, Xiao Hanyan had a look of horror in his eyes when he saw Mewtwo and two people wrapped in corpses. Why are so many S-class weirdos suddenly appearing? It seems that our Bing Jun is in danger. Wang Deipen still breathed indifferently, but there was a sinister smile deep in his eyes. In the final analysis, an S-class awakened person still cannot achieve anything. He was still scrupulous just now, he was still a little too worried. Teacher. The three students looked worriedly towards the direction where the corpses were gathering. They believed that their teacher would not die so easily. But in this extremely critical situation, they could not think of any other means by which Mewtwo could escape. The overwhelming and terrifying tide of corpses, accompanied by the huge body of the giant monster, swallowed up Mewtwo. The awakened ones in the surrounding trial team looked frightened and their breaths were unstable. There was no time to be sad, because they suddenly discovered that the zombies began to attack in their direction. Haha, Lord Bing has long admired your name. In an unknown blue space, an old voice echoed in the space. Mewtwo raised her head and glanced around. There was still the figure of Chi-Chi standing next to her, but the dark zombies and huge monsters all around her had disappeared at some point. They actually came to an unknown space. This light blue space was extremely wide and endless, but Mewtwo could sense that the entire space was surrounded by an invisible light curtain. Is it a barrier? Mewtwo murmured calmly, and then she suddenly looked up as if she had discovered something. Just above the space, two figures suddenly appeared, one tall and one short. The tall one had thin bones, sunken eye sockets, wrinkled skin, and skin tightly attached to the bones, like skin and bones. At first glance, it looked like a shriveled skeleton. The thin one had an old man's face, a slender appearance, and a short stature like a dwarf. The old voice just now was obviously from the mouth of the dwarf old man. The skeleton man standing next to the dwarf old man smiled sinisterly and said in a hoarse voice, As expected of a man codenamed Bing Jun, he is indeed a little more difficult than expected. The scene of Mu Chiu fighting the zombie tide alone just now was also seen by these two people. But even so, there was no fear on their faces, and they obviously did not take Mu Chiu seriously. The energy emitted by these two people is several times stronger than the zombies outside, and they are all S-level awakeners. Mu Chiu turned his gaze to the dwarf old man. Space-related superpowers. Mu Chiu could sense that the space they were in at the moment did not exist in the real world, but was artificially created. When the dwarf old man heard Mu Chiu's question, he was obviously stunned. He did not expect that Mu Chiu was thrown into the space without any panic, but instead pointed out the root of the problem. The dwarf old man smiled and said, Yes, Lord Bing Jun is really meticulous. This is my superpower, space barrier. Mu Chiu was not transferred out of thin air, but entered this temporary space barrier at the moment of being attacked. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MOCNU. Chapter 148. Space barrier. Unlike Ji Yufeng's space travel, the ability of this dwarf old man is to put people into this barrier he temporarily created. Mu Chiu knew that this kind of space barrier created by superpowers obviously could not last too long. With the S-level superpowers of the dwarf old man, he could only trap people for about a quarter of an hour. However, the purpose of these two people was obviously not as simple as trapping him. It's no wonder that Shadow lost to you. He is really good at it. The skeleton man grinned, and the gums without flesh and blood collided, making a creepy click sound. Hearing the mocking laughter of the skeleton man, Mu Chiu also deduced the identity of the visitor, and stared. Wang Deipen's men. The bone dragon sneered, which was considered tacit consent. In his opinion, Mu Chiu was already a bird in a cage. If he dared to offend their Shenlong society, he would definitely die. The old dwarf asked back, Ice Lord has been fighting for a long time, I guess he must be exhausted now. The old dwarf saw the battle just now. The energy in each awakener is limited, even the S-level awakener can't stand such consumption. Why don't you answer a question for us, Lord Ice Lord, and we can give you a quick death? The old dwarf was naturally shocked by Mu Chiu's amazing strength, so he deliberately waited until the critical moment to pull him into the space he created. The energy was mostly lost in the battle, plus the two combat forces of himself and the bone dragon, and this is their home court. Even if they can't beat them, they can still contact the barrier, and there is an overwhelming tide of terrifying corpses outside. All this is within the calculation of the old dwarf Sun Wei. It can be said that Mu Chiu is now unable to escape. What's the problem, www? Mu Chiu narrowed his eyes and looked at the old dwarf, not knowing what he was thinking. The old dwarf smiled and said, How about Bing Jun telling us the secret of how you quickly upgraded, and then telling us the ability of the girl next to you in detail, and I will leave you with the whole body. These two questions are what Wang Deipen cares about, and they are related to how Mu Chiu grew from a B-level awakener to the famous Yuhei Bing Jun in just a few months. As long as it is a means to improve strength, it is what Wang Deipen needs. The old dwarf is not a fool. No one will believe that he will let you live. Murdering companions outside the base is a serious crime in Yuhei. The main purpose of their trip is to solve the problem of Mu Chiu for Shenglonghui. If they can dig out other secrets, it will be a pleasant surprise. I see. After learning the purpose of the two, Mu Chiu smiled. It seems that this is a premeditated plan to target him. Are you so sure you can eat me? Hee, Bing Jun, you don't have to waste time with us here. Even if the barrier time is over, there are still countless corpses waiting for you outside. The dwarf old man thought Mu Chiu was stalling for time with them, so he said, "Lord Bing Jun, please tell us what we want to know as soon as possible. After all, we Shenlong still have many ways to torture people." "Sun Wei, why are you talking so much nonsense?" The skeleton man couldn't wait any longer. With bloodthirsty colors in his deep eye sockets, he looked at Mu Chiu and said, "Just kill him directly. I haven't tasted the heart of an elemental awakener yet." Just as the two were talking, Mu Chiu, who was standing below, suddenly chuckled. "Hee hee. What a coincidence, I'm not in a good mood now." Mu Chiu didn't remember the origin of the girl in red in his mind until now, which made him feel quite irritated. And by chance, Sun Wei and the others appeared in front of him. Sun Wei and the other two were stunned by Mu Chiu's inexplicable words, but then they heard Mu Chiu whisper, "As for Wang Daipen, I will settle the account with him." In Mu Chiu's eyes, Wang Daipen had already become the food of the flame demon, and it was only a matter of time before he was eliminated. How shameless! Hearing Mu Chiu's arrogant words, the skeleton man's eyes showed murderous intent, the energy in his body was running wildly, and his body shape was gradually changing. In an instant, the skeleton man's body continued to grow, and his clothes were torn. The bones of his whole body had broken through the epidermis, his cheekbones were protruding, and even his face became like a lizard. The bones continued to fold and expand, and in just a few breaths, the skeleton man turned into a huge bone dragon. Looking at the skeleton monster in front of him that looked like a dinosaur frame, Mu Chiu remembered that there was such a huge skeleton bone dragon in the corpse tide before, and it seemed that it was the skeleton man who turned into it. The moment the bone dragon appeared, the dwarf old man beside him, who looked like an ant in front of the huge skeleton, also took action immediately. The dwarf old man raised his hand slightly, and the entire huge body of the bone dragon disappeared on the spot. The next second, it appeared directly a few hundred meters away from Mu Chiu, opened its empty and ferocious mouth, and rushed towards Mu Chiu with sharp claws. This space barrier was created by the dwarf old man, and here, he is the absolute master. The huge body of the bone dragon rushed towards Mu Chiu with its white claws. Just now, this attack in the corpse tide could even smash a building. Mu Chiu did not move, and the next second, a thick ice wall suddenly condensed in front of him. The bone dragon's body suddenly hit the ice wall, but only caused tiny cracks on the wall. On the other hand, the bone dragon retreated several steps under the powerful impact. The dwarf old man did not expect that after such a fierce battle, Mu Chiu still had the energy to use his supernatural power. He raised his hand again, and the power of space acted on the ice wall, and the thick ice wall was instantly transferred to the depths of space. The fierce light in the bone dragon's eyes was very fierce. This time, a sharp bone blade protruded from his head, and he gathered all his strength to rush towards Mu Chiu. A circle of white bone blades suddenly rose from the ground beside Mu Chiu, just trapping Mu Chiu and Yui in it. The bright blades kept shrinking, and in front of him was a huge bone dragon rushing with a gust of wind. Mu Chiu was no longer interested in playing with them. Yui. The girl beside him understood, turned around and approached Mu Chiu, her clear eyes like water were full of trust. Black clothes fluttered, and Mu Chiu had a gentle smile on his lips. The next second, Mu Chiu suddenly raised his hand to Chi-Chi's chest, and a dazzling light hole flashed out. The mark of the king on Mu Chiu's chest flashed brightly, and silver-white streaks emerged from the vortex-like white light hole on the girl's chest. An indescribable domineering aura filled the space. What is that? The dwarf old man looked at the scene in front of him in disbelief. In his eyes, a beam of white dazzling light shot up into the sky, accompanied by an unparalleled wave of terror that swept through the entire space barrier. And what frightened him the most was that as the beam of light shot straight into the sky, his most proud, indestructible space barrier, at this moment, shattered. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 149. P.S. Friendly reminder, the BGM of this chapter is Kobayashi Miku's sword drawing divine song Ias. The overwhelming horror of the zombies instantly swept the awakened people of the hundreds of trial teams around. The awakened people who were already exhausted were no match for these fearless monsters, but at this time they were already surrounded by the zombies and had no way to retreat. The miserable wails of humans and the bloodthirsty roars of zombies resounded in this dead city, and together played a symphony with the theme of collapse. We can't hold on any longer, request support, request support. In a corner of the towering building in the ruins, a law enforcement officer wearing a black uniform and carrying a camera on his shoulder looked at the horror scene below with an anxious face, and at the same time transmitted the picture to the Yuhei base hundreds of kilometers away. Dozens of law enforcement team members have now fallen under the claws of the terrifying heretics, and only a few awakened people like him who have certain concealment methods can survive. On the streets of Yuhei base, countless human survivors looked at the endless zombies in the dark waves in the screen with great anxiety. The tragic death of each human in the screen made them recall the horror of the outbreak of the end of the world, and a feeling of sadness began to spread rapidly among the onlookers. Muchu. Wei Linger stood in front of the crowd, frowning, biting her lower lip and looking at the most rampant zombies. She didn't believe that Muchu would be defeated so easily. In just a few minutes, dozens of awakened people died in the zombie tide, and more than 100 surviving humans gathered in a circle, trying to resist the zombie monsters in front of them. The unique abilities of the awakened people cooperated with each other, and temporarily resisted a wave of zombies. But they knew that even if they did so, they would only survive, and they would become meat for these man-eating monsters in a short time. Jiyu was surrounded and protected by the crowd. Her eyes were shining silver, and the horrifying zombies were invisible to her. She intended to find a way for everyone to escape. "Be careful!" Jiyu suddenly cried out, and a flash of horror flashed in her eyes. A terrifying roar accompanied by a fierce gust of wind came from afar. Everyone was shocked and looked over. It turned out that it was the huge mutant gorilla with trembling hair swooping towards them. The huge body was muscular and densely covered with hair like steel needles, making it look like a large hedgehog, smashing into hundreds of awakened people with a huge momentum like a meteorite. Seeing this, the awakened people fled in all directions. Most of them were children who participated in the trial. Almost the moment the team dispersed, they were surrounded and swallowed by the zombies around them. The giant gorilla's huge body fell to the ground like a meteor, and with a bang, a huge hole was smashed into the solid ground. In the smoke and dust, several awakened people who had no time to dodge were shaken by the aftermath and fell to the ground unsteadily. Then, the hair like steel needles pierced their fragile bodies. At this moment, there was another strange sound on the ground not far away. Everyone looked hurriedly and saw a terrifying maggot several feet long surging out from the ground. The disgusting tentacles made people want to vomit, and the mouthparts spewed dark green mucus. Once shot, the bodies of both zombie heretics and human awakened people were corroded in an instant, leaving only a white dry skeleton. In the blink of an eye, the defense formed by hundreds of human awakened people collapsed instantly. At this moment, all awakened people had no hope of survival. Surrounded by such a terrifying zombie tide, even S-level awakened people could not survive. An atmosphere called despair permeated the many human survivors. Lin Feng in the crowd was covered in blood, and a deep red flame burned on his body. Looking at the horrible corpses scattered all over the street, Lin Feng gritted his teeth and made a decision in his heart. Look, what is that?" Suddenly, an awakened person's voice trembled, and he looked at the distant sky in horror. Everyone followed the awakened person's gaze, and their pupils trembled in an instant, and an expression of disbelief appeared on their faces. I saw that a strong blue beam suddenly burst out in the sky, accompanied by dazzling silver-white ripples and rushing straight into the sky. WWW. It seemed that there was a low chanting of Sanskrit from heaven echoing in everyone's ears. The thick clouds stacked in the sky were broken and penetrated by this deep blue beam that rushed into the sky, reflecting the sky into a white expanse. At this moment, the sky shattered. What is that? Everyone was shocked by this shocking vision, staring blankly at the source of the beam of light. A man in a black robe raised his right arm, holding a ferocious sword that was more than 10 feet long, exuding a terrifying aura. Light blue ripples and silver-white streaks were wrapped around him. The man's face was lowered and his face could not be seen clearly, and his left arm was holding a pink-haired girl. Just in front of the man, a giant bone dragon with a broken head and horns stood there trembling, and the bones of his right arm were completely broken. The black-robed man held the ferocious sword in his hand and stretched out his arm to swing it. A circular silver sword edge mixed with ice blue streaks slashed towards the direction of the giant maggot. In an instant, the sharp sword energy streaked across the flat ground like an electric arc, and countless zombie monsters were penetrated by the sword edge. The next second, the roar of the zombies stopped abruptly. Blood spurted out all over the sky, and broken limbs and heads were thrown into the air. With just one blow, hundreds of high-level zombies died. The huge mutated maggot was struck by the final sword energy, and its body was broken into 2 pieces. Foul-smelling green mucus spurted out from the wound, and even pits were corroded by it on the earth. The man in black robe also raised his head at this moment, and the first thing that caught everyone's eyes was the dark red eyes under the flying broken hair. It's Mewtwo. The Awakens who survived the scene were shocked, and the expressions on their faces could no longer be described as horrified. At the same time, this shocking scene was also transmitted back to Yuhei base. Countless survivors showed excitement on their faces when they saw Mewtwo's figure appearing. It's void. Wei Linger stood in the crowd and saw the beam of light reaching into the sky. She covered her face and cried, and let out a sound of joy as thin as a gossamer. The moment the soaring beam appeared, a law enforcement team of thousands of people also arrived. That beam of light. Wei Ying looked up at the sky-shattering beam of light with a solemn expression. Even though they were far apart, he could still feel the terrifying fluctuations emanating from it. Ji Yufeng also turned his head, his eyes filled with emotion under the mirror light. He had just noticed an aura of superpowers that surpassed S level in an instant. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the Flame Demon Lord. Author, MOCNU. Chapter 150. How is it possible? In the conference room of the Yuhei base building, a group of Yuhei executives stared at the screen in amazement. The string of Buddhist beads in Zhang Qinggui's hand suddenly broke under the violent rotation, and he stared blankly at the man in black in the screen. He was always calm and steady, but at this moment he was shocked by Mewtwo's performance. Pa! A violent slapping sound rang out, and Wang Deipen stood up at some point. Wang Deipen stared at the empty sword in Mewtwo's hand, his eyes full of greed. The ferocious giant sword in the picture that was flying in the air, domineering and unparalleled, and the domineering aura urged all things to submit, as if swearing the absolute sovereignty of an emperor. This kind of power. This is the power. He has always longed for the power that would allow him to become the king who looks down on the world in this end times. Even because of being too excited, his face turned red. Wang Deipen was breathing rapidly, and his chest was heaving violently. The flame broadsword that he had obtained with great difficulty seemed worthless in comparison with this giant sword. He must get it. Wang Deipen stared at the ferocious sword in Mewtwo's hand, and the fire of ambition was burning in the depths of his eyes. In the front-line battlefield of Corpse Tide, Ji Yu's eyes were silver-white, and she happened to see Mewtwo's face in the silver pupil state. The dark red pupils were extremely indifferent, and there was no extra expression on his handsome face. Silver-white light patterns kept appearing around him, and crystal blue ice flowers were entwined and floating around him. The beautiful girl was lying in his arms and sleeping peacefully, and groups of zombies stood silently in place, as if they were devout believers worshipping the Lord. At this moment, Mewtwo looked like a supreme king who looked down on the world. Teacher. The three students looked at the scene in front of them with great excitement, and they were proud of it. This powerful man who was invincible in the zombie tide and was like a god was their teacher. Roar. The skeleton dragon as tall as a house roared, and the fierce energy began to operate wildly in his body. The next second, the bone dragon's white bones without a trace of flesh and blood suddenly grew bone blades like swords, and the huge body was covered with thick bone armor. The bone dragon roared, and took several steps while leaping, rushing towards Mewtwo with a fierce impact. At the same time, sharp bone spurs suddenly rose under Mewtwo's feet, and dozens of bone spurs pierced his vitals. Mewtwo snorted lightly, tapped his toes lightly, and a strong cold air that seemed to come from the polar regions floated under his feet. The bone spurs that were as fast as lightning were frozen in an instant, and the extreme cold air even froze the surrounding zombies. Facing the fully armed bone dragon charging towards him, Mewtwo did not move, but the corners of his mouth inexplicably rose slightly. He swung the void greatsword in his hand and chopped at the bone dragon directly, with a crystal blue beam of light wrapped around the blade. The sharp blade collided with the solid bone armor, and the terrifying air wave spread quickly, and the black clothes fluttered, but Mewtwo's figure never moved at all. The bone dragon's empty eyes flashed with human horror, and a huge force that he could not resist came from the blade, and the powerful pressure made him breathless. The strong wind blew, and the void greatsword directly penetrated the thick bone armor wrapped around the bone dragon's body, and a deep knife mark instantly appeared on the white bones on the chest. At this moment, the giant gorilla with trembling hair like a steel needle swooped towards Mewtwo with a violent look in his eyes. But somehow, it was as if there was an invisible barrier in front of Mewtwo. The giant gorilla's huge body hit it, but it was bounced off by this invisible barrier. Another ice spear condensed in front of Mewtwo, which was also wrapped with silver-white, metallic luster strange silk. With the blessing of the silver-white silk, the ice spear was several times stronger than before in terms of speed and momentum. The ice spear easily penetrated the giant gorilla's skull the moment it shot out. At this moment, the hard hair on its body was useless. Mewtwo held the beautiful girl with pink hair in his arms. As he stepped lightly, a terrifying energy wave spread around him. The zombies nearby were either frozen into ice cubes by the cold air of the polar region, or had their limbs cut off by the silver-white silk spreading in the air. For a moment, Mewtwo's feet were extremely empty, which seemed particularly strange in this place full of zombie monsters. Slowly walking to the bone dragon lying on the ground, the huge body of the bone dragon trembled the moment it saw Mewtwo's figure. The bone dragon's eyes were filled with pleading, and its teeth were trembling, as if it wanted to say something, and the energy on its body also plummeted. The bone dragon never thought that Mewtwo would have such a terrifying trump card. He had forgotten about any mission to hunt him, and now he just wanted to survive. The bone dragon thought about turning back into a human form and begging Mewtwo for mercy. I guess Mewtwo didn't dare to mess around in front of everyone in the base. But in the next second, Mewtwo suddenly smiled, raised the void greatsword in his hand and inserted it into the vital part of the bone dragon's chest. The violent energy was poured into the bone dragon's body through the sword body, and the unimaginable violent energy directly filled the bone dragon's body, and the originally empty eye sockets were now full of pain. With a loud bang, the violent and terrifying energy fluctuations exploded, and in the blink of an eye, the bone dragon was blown into a ball of white powder. But at the moment of the explosion, a ball of light suddenly flew out from the head of the bone dragon, and in an instant it soared several miles and was about to hide in the space to escape. As expected by Mewtwo, he swung the ferocious sword in his hand, and another arc-like light blade flashed. The short dwarf old man Sun Wei was fleeing frantically in the space barrier, with lingering horror in his eyes. He couldn't understand why the original prey would emit such a terrifying energy fluctuation. At the moment of drawing the sword, Sun Wei even felt a trace of destructive breath. He now has only one goal: escape. At this moment, a gust of wind flashed by his ear, and a circular arc blade wrapped in sharp power broke through the air directly. This blade can actually penetrate space. A gorgeous blue blade flashed, and Sun Wei's body was directly split into two.